We're now going to have a panel session on the future of the cloud. We've got some great experts lined up that are going to be coming to the stage now. And hopefully they're going to give us some insight as to what the future of the cloud holds. We've got Philip Carnelley, who is IDC Research Director, who's very kindly offered to chair the panel. So he's on the stage just now. So if the experts could come in, that'd be great. Can we have the experts? I guess, guys, just very quickly before you start, are you going to introduce yourselves? Because we've seen Mark, but we've not seen you. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Rather good afternoon, isn't it, technically? And welcome to this panel session on the future of cloud. I've got a very distinguished panel with me today, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. I hope you can all hear okay, even if you're standing on the edges there. So I think I'm Philip Carnelley, and I'm a research director with IDC. You've probably heard of IDC. We do IT market research. We look at trends in the market. We write about global take-up of technologies, the future of technologies. And so one of the things I've been researching a lot over the last few years, as you might imagine, are cloud technologies, which for us are foundational in the future development of the internet and indeed IT as a whole. Together with mobile, with social, with big data analytics, we call this the third platform of computing. So the way we look at the world is, we used to have mainframe computing, and that was, if you like, the first platform. Then we moved to client server, which was the second platform, and now we have cloud-centric or internet-centric computing, which, as I say, we call the third platform. And a question we get from a lot of our clients is, well, okay, and there we are, we're in the third platform, what happens next? And so this is essentially the question I'm hoping that our distinguished panel will be able to answer for us. So I'm going to take them through a few of my questions, then I'm hoping we'll have a little bit of time left for questions from the floor. Thank you. So I can sit down now, and perhaps we can start. Mark, I know you've just given the last session, but I think quite a lot of the people here weren't in that. So if you could just tell us who you are, what you do within Microsoft. Thank you.
So I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Azure. I've been in Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud platform, for 5 years. I've been at Microsoft for 10 years. As the CTO, my responsibility is the technical strategy and architecture of the core infrastructure of the platform.
Matt?
I'm Matt McNeil. I work for Google. I've been there about 6 years, and prior to that I was in enterprise systems integration. I've been working on Google's cloud platform for probably about 4 years, right from the early days of incubation, really, as we were starting to consider externalizing a lot of the technologies that we've developed in Google, I suppose, over the last 17 years. So it's been probably one of the most interesting places that I've been on my career. It seems to get more and more interesting every month. It's a really, really great time, I think, for technology.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Howard, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Howard Ting. I run marketing for Nutanix, and unlike the other two companies, my company probably needs a brief introduction. We're a late-stage, high-growth technology company based out of Silicon Valley. Our mission is really to make enterprise infrastructure invisible and bring a lot of the cloud technologies and the web-scale technologies to the enterprise market. So we're re-platforming the enterprise data center, helping companies build private clouds. And we're about 6 years old, and we've had a great deal of success in that time.
Thank you. So I think if we could just drill down a little bit more into what it is that you do, or your parts of the organization. And I thought the best way to ask this question really was to ask you what kind of workloads are being run on the platforms that you produce. I mean, Howard, it's a slightly different question for you, but you get the sense of it, I think. But if you could tell us, because I think there's a difference in the way that we use Azure, and I think it's changing as well, and the way Google Cloud Platform is used, and Nutanix is used in a different context again. So if you could give us a little feeling of today, and then we'll move on to tomorrow. Thank you. So again, I'll start with you, if I may, Mark.
Okay, well, the Azure platform has been growing over time. Of course, there's an infrastructure layer, which is network, compute, and storage, the ability to bring loose, raw virtual machines to the platform and connect them together with networking and then have them use storage. But layered on top of that, there's dozens of platform as a service offerings. Everything from MapReduce as a service to data ingestion as a service, machine language as a service, to device management as a service. The number of services continues to expand as the platform grows. And then at Microsoft, we've got a bunch of first-party PaaS and SaaS offerings that are on top of the platform or migrating to the top of the Azure platform, including things like Xbox Live, Office 365, Skype for Business. You're seeing Cortana Analytics on top of the platform, Intune, or Enterprise Mobility Management, device management is on top of the platform, and that continues to expand. And then, of course, it is a public cloud, so there's many, many different third parties that are building their applications on top of the platform.
Okay, and Matt, I'll go for you again.
Yeah, so I suppose it's interesting to consider a little bit where Google's platforms come from. Initially, it's something we really built to run our own stuff. So the essence of Google's platform was to run Google scale infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure at Google, it means a lot more than, as you say, just the infrastructure of VMs and machines and networks. It actually includes a lot of the data services, the machine learning fabrics, etc. So when we look at what customers are coming to do on the platform, actually it's a full range. There are some people who are coming to do the sort of the same mess for less type approach, taking what they're doing today on-premise and bringing them to really that hosted infrastructure VM type approach. And then we've got, I suppose, much more faster moving new businesses ranging everything from gaming into ad tech, into data analytics specialist startups who are coming for the platform services which bring really a different level of abstraction. So the range of jobs which are coming over, both from very intense compute type workloads to very much classic enterprise workloads to fun, games, mobile, all of these we're seeing coming in at the same time. So it's a fascinating space from that perspective.
Just coming back to you a moment then, Mark. Are the majority of people using Azure, are they using packaged apps that they already had and they've moved them across? Or is it largely about new applications, new ways of using the cloud, new things they can do?
I think it's actually a mix, and we're going to see a mix going forward. We have lift and shift, of course, which is enterprises bringing their apps from on-prem, largely unchanged, but as much as they can, taking advantage of the cloud and the elasticity the cloud gives them. But it's the new scenarios that I think are really causing an explosion of cloud.
Okay.
The modern or cloud-native application development, the big data scenarios with machine learning, the software as a service applications that ISVs are building on top of the platform.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So moving on to you, Howard, what sort of things are people using your system technologies for? What does it bring?
Yeah, about 2/3 of our workloads tend to be the core enterprise apps. So we run Exchange, we run Oracle, we run SAP, we run databases, SQL Server. So about 2/3 of our workloads tend to be those core enterprise apps, and then about 1/3 tends to be VDI or big data apps like a Splunk or something. So some of the newer workloads. So about 2/3 kind of traditional enterprise apps that are up for refresh, and the customers want to run it on newer generation infrastructure. And then about 1/3 they tend to be greenfield projects that they're deploying for the first time.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So the question that occurs to me really is, when people are moving their workloads, I mean, you mentioned your work for less, your mess for less. Do you advise people, or do you see people mainly sort of trying to migrate the applications, or are they transforming them on the way? Are they actually taking advantage of new styles of computing because cloud is essentially location independent, and it's easier to access it through mobiles and all of that kind of stuff. And obviously there's the scalability of a cloud solution compared to on-prem. Do you think people are mainly doing transformation on the way, or are they mainly just moving it and then thinking about the transformation? Perhaps we could start with you then, Matt.
So I think the answer is it depends. You know, people have got 25 to 30 years of investment in what they have there today. You know, you can't take that away. There are definitely efficiencies that can be made through hosting it differently or more efficiently, and getting some benefits from that, from, I suppose, the elasticism and moving more to a variable cost rather than capital cost model. I don't think really we've seen what cloud can really do yet, and I think it's going to challenge us quite fundamentally in some of our architectural paradigms. And to take advantage of, I think, where the cloud will be in 5 to 10 years, it will involve rethinking the way applications are designed. So what you see in people coming to the cloud today, if people are starting something new, so if you're looking at, say, a lot of digital media today, mobile gaming, these are industries which have grown over the last few years. They're doing things very differently from the way we would have architected the enterprise even 10 years ago, because they're approaching it from a greenfield site. But the majority of people don't have that sort of luxury. So I think we're going to see a hybrid for quite a long time. Actually, while the ISP ecosystems, as you were discussing, they will, I think, carry a lot of that move. I think we will see some in the enterprise in certain areas of workloads, but I think, you know, you don't want to re-engineer an SAP instance.
Okay,
You know.
Howard, I think a lot of your clients are sort of born in the cloud, so does that give you a different perspective?
Well, we sell to a variety of companies, both newer companies that are kind of born in the cloud generation, as well as much older companies that are making their way to the cloud. So the thing that we see more than anything else is that the cloud has reset buyer expectations for agility, scale, and economics, frankly. And we see that as those expectations have shifted, the traditional infrastructure vendors, and I'm talking about HP, EMC, Dell, IBM, Lenovo, you know, those types of companies, they've had a hard time adapting. And obviously their architectures are very different than the cloud companies. The way they sell is also very different than the cloud companies. So Nutanix, one of the reasons I think for our success has been that we emulate the cloud technology and the business model as closely as possible for an on-prem infrastructure company. We sell fractionally, we sell distributed systems that can scale out, so you can buy what you need today and then scale it to very, very large clusters over time. And we eliminate a lot of the complexity that holds IT back. You know, I think our key message is, in order for IT to take the next step in adding business value and becoming an enabler for business, we need to make the infrastructure far less of our budget, time, and resources. Today, it takes too much effort just to keep the lights on, maintaining systems, patching, updating, all that stuff that doesn't add value. So we think that the infrastructure really has to be re-platformed and really resemble more like what the cloud companies have built, so that we can focus more of our effort and resources on building better apps, better services, better products. And so that's our mission, is to re-platform the enterprise data center, to make the infrastructure invisible, to elevate the role of IT. And the cloud companies have been a design point for us. We've learned a lot from the cloud companies, and we've emulated a lot of their approaches.
Okay, Mark, would you like to give your perspective?
Well, so I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things Microsoft IT went through, because they were very representative of what we see customers going through as well. With MSIT, if you talk about the new applications they're developing, they want to use cloud-native application models for that and take advantage of the benefits they get with the elasticity and availability and scalability of that application model. But when it comes to existing applications that they want to quickly move up into the cloud, there are a couple of categories that show you that just blindly moving them isn't going to necessarily save you the kind of money that cloud promises. One is their dev test environments. So MSIT used to build large dev test environments on-prem, infrastructure dedicated to dev test. The fact is that most of those resources sit idle 80% of the time. It's just when the developers are actually in the process of doing development and testing, which is a fraction of the day almost always, that they're in use, and otherwise they're sitting there costing the company money. So When they moved those up into the cloud, they just didn't simply create a static infrastructure that represented those on-prem infrastructures they were moving. They moved those into elastically deployed environments. And they've actually got a watchdog that sits and looks at developer environments and shuts down those virtual machines at the end of the day if they've been idle. And this is saving the company millions of dollars a year, and of course in our own use of resources that we could otherwise selling to third parties by taking advantage of that. So a change in the way that the application's managed, not necessarily a change in the application. And the second one is taking a look at migrating applications that are on-prem to the cloud to take advantage of cloud properties. Again, the applications that scale out occasionally are the ones that are going to cost the most money on-prem because you've got a dedicated infrastructure there to handle their peaks. One of the classic examples of that at Microsoft, and I'm sure every company has got that, if you've got an internal application like this, is our review, our yearly or biannual review software, a line of business application which all the managers and employees go to, check in and see, report on each other and part of the career growth. Well, that of course is scaling out, or the demand on that peaks a couple times a year, and that literally the day after the review process is closed, that thing goes totally idle. So that was costing the company a huge amount of money. When they moved that application up into the cloud, and for the time when they moved this, they left the data itself on-prem. That was a harder job to move that. But the application itself they moved, and they made it elastic with auto scale. So the thing scales out as demand grows, and then again, the day after review process is closed, the thing shuts off and goes completely to zero utilization.
Okay, so moving on to look at more, well, I think one more question about kind of almost the here and now, but how things are moving is, I was taken by your point, Howard, about, you know, the traditional platform vendors are having, I think your phrase was, a hard time adapting. A lot of people here, I think, will be buying infrastructure from either those traditional companies or more likely through their partners. And I was wondering, do you see the partners ecosystem changing in line with the way the technology is changing and the way people are buying their just technology solutions, the way they're deploying them? You know, things in hybrid clouds and private clouds and all of that. Does that mean we need new people to supply and implement those solutions, or are the existing ones managing to keep pace? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think any big technology shift has a ripple effect throughout the ecosystem. And one of the things we see in the reseller community, I think that's what you're asking about, is there has to be an up-leveling of the skill set. The rack stack deployment services that a lot of the resellers will deploy, a lot of that has become irrelevant because the products have become so much simpler to deploy. In the traditional 3-tier architecture model where you have to deploy a SAN, you know, and you have to carve up LUNs and RAID groups and volumes and all that stuff that doesn't really add a lot of value. You needed people to go do that stuff, and service providers or SIs or resellers would do a lot of that work for their customers to get initially deployed. In the newer products, none of that exists. So we're not doing things in the old way anymore, and so skills have to adapt, and we definitely see that in the ecosystem, that resellers or partners are starting to have to adapt to these simplified products, these products that are much more converged in nature, and they're adapting their skills to do more around analytics and design and higher level services that I think add more value.
Okay. Perhaps I better move on then. One thing I wanted to ask you all, a bit of a curveball question maybe, but the recent ruling at the Court of Justice about safe harbor, I don't know if you've had time to study that, but I'm sure it must have resonated through your organizations, the idea that data will not be transferable from Europe to the US and back without a whole raft of new regulatory oversight or something. I mean, that's my understanding of the position. Have you got any views on that in your organizations yet? What's the implications of this ruling?
Well, I think, as you say, it's I'll pick this one up for a start. I think it's something that's happening very, very quickly at the moment. And, you know, I'm not an expert, actually, on policy and legal. I haven't had time to read this thing in detail. But I think if we take a step back and see what actually is motivating a lot of this, I think it's actually a very positive thing. I think it's showing actually a sense of maturity in the cloud markets as a whole. And the reason I say that is a lot of these conversations happen as a consequence of people caring about it a lot more than they used to, perhaps. And actually, the fact that technology is moving very quickly, it needs to be sort of refreshed and rediscussed on a regular basis. It's a good thing that governments are having these conversations and debates. So, I know that, we're very much in conversations with both the EU Commission and the US and the DPAs and all this sort of thing to understand how this evolves and how we support them in it. But I think generally this is a very strong signal of the maturity of the market, actually, and how it's developing. That these have to be debated and talked through.
Anyone else? Mark, do you have a comment?
I don't have any specific comment on that ruling, but I will say that when it comes to the, and it impacts, I think, maybe if it impacts in any way, it's Microsoft higher level applications that are running on top of our cloud. When it comes to the cloud itself, we're adaptable to any kinds of changes like this and data sovereignty regulations. And I'll just give you one example of the lengths that we'll go to meet business where business wants us to be or needs us to be, and that is China. We're the first public cloud operator to run in China, and we do so with a very Chinese-centric business model there. We operate our Chinese data centers, our Chinese Azure regions, and Office 365 at arm's length using a Chinese entity, 21 Vianet, to give us over-the-shoulder access to that environment. So Chinese businesses, Chinese government requires data to remain resident in China for many scenarios. The Chinese region there allows that, and then they also have requirements, some of them cultural, some of them legal, around who's accessing that data and how. And that's where we entered in this agreement with 21 Vianet, which of course is burdensome for us, but the ability to do business in China definitely pays off.
So the solutions already exist. Maybe it's a little bit of a storm in a teacup then. Okay, thank you. I'll move on then, unless you want to jump in on that, Howard. Are you?
The only thing I would add to that is I think it comes down to control. I think control is one of those things that we still don't know yet where things will settle out as far as control of data, control of the infrastructure as well. Because we think that there is a great deal of value in the public cloud, and there's a big role, an increasing role for public cloud services. However, we don't see everything going to the public cloud. And the reason for that is there's a premium that you pay when you go have the option to cancel out at any time. It's just like when we go to a new city like this, we rent a hotel room. When we go to university, we rent an apartment. We don't buy a house. The reason for that is because we're not there for a permanent period of time. There's always a market for renting and owning. And I think our view is that renting and owning will continue to exist in IT as well. And one of the reasons that we own is because we get to control that environment. We get to do whatever we want to the house. We can remodel when we want. We could change the appliances. When we rent an apartment, we often cannot do that. And I think that is a little bit of what you're touching on here, is that when you use the public cloud, the customers are not entirely in control of the environment. And we think that our view, Nutanix's view, is that if we can bring all the goodness of the public cloud to the on-prem world, but give them the control that they're accustomed to, I think that creates the best of both worlds.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm hearing is we have a degree of maturity. We have a lot of technologies and tools that are already in place to drive the cloud forward. Managing and governing and controlling is something that still a lot of companies probably need to get their heads around how best to do this. What we're seeing at IDC is that the market itself is growing still very rapidly, something like 18-20% compound growth year on year, which is a huge amount, really, when you're looking at a market already worth billions. So what's going to carry on driving that, in your view? Maybe you could give me the top 2 or 3 things that are going to drive the market forward. This is about the future of cloud, I suppose. What are the things we should look out for, expect in the next year, 2 years, 5 years? What are the developments that we're going to see? Who would like to take that first?
I'll start, I guess. I think it's the growth rates are very nuanced. I think the growth rate that you're referencing is probably the icon of the public cloud world, AWS. I think they're growing roughly 80% year on year in their last quarter. So there is tremendous growth in the market. I think IDC just came out with numbers last week or earlier this week that the folks that sell infrastructure to the cloud vendors, they're growing at roughly 30% year on year. And then if you look at traditional infrastructure in our enterprise markets, that market's either flat or down. Like if you look at storage or other markets, those markets are either flat or down. So there is a big spectrum of growth to non-growth, I think, in the market. One of the things that I think we'll see revitalize at least the enterprise infrastructure spend, the market where we play, is that the products will start to adapt, the companies will start to adapt, the technology will get better, and we will start to bring more of the public cloud technologies into the enterprise infrastructure products. I think that's one driver for growth in our space where we play. And then I think the other one is that there are always new ambitions that companies have. The companies that we work with, they always have new ideas about how they can drive their business with new IT projects. Because today, entire businesses, $10 billion businesses, are built purely on data, bits and bytes, and data, ones and zeros, right? Companies like Uber, Airbnb, they don't own any physical assets. They don't sell anything, really. They're just basically apps and data. And so we see that there will be more and more of these companies, a new generation of companies that have IT at the core of their business. That's all they do. So that will be another big driver of growth, I think, in terms of what we see.
Okay. Mark, then, what I was kind of looking for was maybe new use cases or new technology developments that you think will drive cloud forward. Google, you must think about these things all the time. What's your view?
Well, I think the big problem we have is when we talk about cloud, we don't really know what it means anymore. It means so many different things, actually. So even if you look at sort of a provider like ourselves, there's one element which is, the classic sort of VMs, and really that, all the primitives we're very familiar with still exist. I think that will be commoditized, and actually is already being commoditized. If you look at the price of how that has dropped over the last 18 months, prices per unit has been falling by about 30-40%, something of that region. So actually we're getting to the stage now where it's actually a premium to buy rather than rent. So I think there's a trend there which is swapping over. But that's only one side of it. I think there's a raw economics and the flexibility side, which is one element of driver. But I think the more interesting side is that when you start breaking down those primitives into something different, there's a whole new class of applications that start being able to be built. And they can deliver capabilities and efficiencies at costs which you cannot see in the way that we build today. And this is, as Mark was saying, this sort of move into more of this platform-first mentality is, I think, actually what's going to be really exciting in cloud in the future. Certainly, in Google, this is one of the things we had to do really early on to achieve what we've achieved, both in terms of velocity and in terms of technology and in terms of scale. And we know it works. We know it works.
Okay. Mark, same question for you, but I'd like to add a little bit, because a lot of our clients have been asking about the Internet of Things, and I know Microsoft have got a solution on top of Azure, so maybe you could sort of thread that in somewhere, how you see that, because I see that as a really big driver.
Well, I think Internet of Things, big data, machine learning are altogether part of a flywheel that's going to be driving huge growth and disrupting every vertical. Talk about Airbnb, Uber is another example, purely machine learning applications in the cloud. And I'll give you an example, a concrete example of just how the cloud empowers these kinds of disruptive applications. How many people have heard of howold.net? So I'm surprised so few people are raising their hands. This is probably the most popular application in Microsoft's history. It was developed in 2 weeks. Yeah. And if you go to howold.net right now, it lets you take a picture and upload it of yourself or anybody else, and it will estimate how old it is based on machine learning. And it's getting more accurate as more people have uploaded. Actually, literally at this point, billions of pictures have been uploaded to it. But again, 2 weeks to develop an application that makes use of visual face recognition, pattern matching, and scaled up to handle the load of tens and hundreds of millions of users hitting that once it went viral. That's just an example. Now, when it comes to IoT, you have, I think it's 25 billion devices Gartner estimates are going to be on the planet in the year 2020, connected devices. And this is going to be across all spectrums of business as well. I just gave a talk on future trends, and I mentioned ThyssenKrupp as just one example of an Internet of Things company that's taking advantage of the cloud. Every one of their elevators is highly instrumented and pumping lots of data up into the cloud. And machine learning algorithms are looking at that and doing things like predictive maintenance. So based on what the sensors are reporting and machine learning algorithms, they're able to figure out that an elevator is going to fail or require some kind of maintenance before it actually does. And they're sending a technician out proactively so that the elevator stays in service as much as possible. And that's saving them tons of money. It's also creating a better customer experience. Again, something that only is possible when you get that kind of elasticity, big data, and on-demand machine learning in the cloud. A solution they put together very quickly that 20 years ago would have taken months or years to put together.
Interesting, thank you.
One of the applications that kind of is the thread between all of our comments here is something that we're all going to experience in the not too distant future, the Google driverless car. I live in a city very close to Mountain View where Google is headquartered, and for the last 2 years, these cars are being tested in my neighborhood. So we know that we're real close to when these cars are going to hit the market. And that application, if we call it that, is going to just consume so much horsepower, processing power, requires so much data storage, so many analytics applications written on top for it to function properly. Just that one change in how we do things today to how we could see ourselves doing things in the future will drive a huge amount of demand for computing power and storage.
Interesting, thank you. I think we do have a bit of time for questions from the floor. It's going to be a bit tricky, but yes, sir. Just wait a second while we get your microphone.
Hey, how you doing? You
guys could just say where you're coming from, please, sir.
Sure, I'm Angel Diaz, our Vice President of Cloud Technology and Architecture for IBM. How you guys doing?
Hey.
Hey, you guys didn't talk about interoperability across clouds. I mean, I know in Google we partnered up and we did containers, and you all joined OpenStack. Microsoft, you're working in Cloud Foundry. What is your perspective on interoperability in the future of cloud?
Who would like to start? Mark.
Well, sure. So we've actually worked with Google on making sure that Kubernetes works great on Azure. As you mentioned, we work with Cloud Foundry to make sure Cloud Foundry works on Azure. I don't know if that's what you mean by interoperability. I can interpret that in different ways. Like, one of the things that people sometimes say is, hey, why don't you just implement the same APIs as AWS? Or why don't you guys, Google, Amazon, AWS, all get together and have a common API across the three of you? And my answer to that is that I think that that's a difficult, extremely difficult thing to do for a number of reasons. One is we've got platforms that are already built and have their own perspectives on some of these things, from subtle differences to major differences in the way that we model things and that we represent things, and make it very hard to create a seamless abstraction across them. But more importantly for me is I think that we're not done yet. And whenever you've got a space this young, that with this much change, we're talking about new scenarios that didn't exist a few years ago. We haven't figured out what cloud applications are really going to look like. I think Howard mentioned, we're still figuring that out, and it's way too early to standardize on something when there's so much change, I think. So that's my perspective on it.
Right. Anyone would like to add?
Yeah, I think, we have a challenge, I think, today. We may be running, some virtualization software internally and have, say, like a private cloud, but actually the portability of those workloads around into different places is actually quite tricky. Most of this, I think, comes down to the fact that most hypervisors are proprietary. It's actually very hard to make it portable at that sort of level. One of the things I think that excites me actually about the containerization and Docker being one of them, Kubernetes, this whole movement is actually, it gives us an abstraction of unit of compute which can be standardized and can be community owned. So one of the real drivers internally about making sure Kubernetes did go out and was sort of free to the community and participated in by the whole consortium is is actually that's only when there's that joint ownership will there be the sort of ability to give you the real portability in the way that is possible theoretically. It's just not there today. So I think there's great promise in that. I feel it's still quite early days, but some really, really interesting work and collaboration going across in the container space. I mean, containers is much more bigger than just, it's much more significant and bigger than just the container. I think, again, it's one of those things that we really haven't seen how that paradigm can develop yet. It's something we're very familiar with. We run everything in containers. About 2 billion a week, I think, we spin.
Thank you. And Howard, I mean, you work with a number of the hypervisors, providers and so on, don't you? So you must have a view on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not sure I would characterize it as interoperability, but I think what is necessary and very important is app mobility. The ability for applications to move between computing environments within the data center, between different hypervisors, and then across data centers into the public cloud. And I think the ability to drag and drop an app from your on-prem data center to AWS or Azure or Google's data centers and then bring it back and then bring it somewhere else, I think that is something that absolutely needs to be there for end users. And I'm not sure that any of the large cloud providers are really in the right position to provide that. I think there'll be a third-party vendors, and there's an opportunity there for vendors to provide that mobility. Kind of to think of it as the next generation vMotion, right? What is that, and who will provide that? And we at Nutanix are working on things along those lines, and I'm sure many other startups are working on that as well. There are industry movements like OpenStack to try and bring more standardization. I'm not sure that that has really fulfilled its mission, and I think, obviously there's a lot of customization of the different OpenStack implementations that make the interoperability very limited. So I don't know that we can expect it from the large cloud vendors. I don't know that we can expect it from something like OpenStack. I think some vendor will probably have to provide that stitching of the different environments.
Okay, thank you. I think we had a question over here. Yes, sir.
Hi. Hello. My name is Jonathan. I'm a DevOps engineer. So I use public clouds. And I just want to mention the elephant in the room. And so when you talk about Amazon, AWS, in the past, you would go to your to finance and ask for money to buy hardware. Now you can hear these stories about accountants begging the engineers to stop spinning up instances on Amazon. And you guys, both Google and Azure, you are now billing per minute instead of per hour, I understand. So I just want to hear how you approach controlling costs in the cloud.
Good question. Controlling costs in the cloud. Do you want to start?
So it's very interesting. I mean, if you think about control is really, really important. It's important for everyone. It's important for us to manage our budgets. And basically the way we've approached controlling costs is to have a very fixed size and then degrade performance. And then you go to the CFO with your business case and ROI, and maybe 6 months later you get to relieve that problem. Now, I think with cloud is we don't have to have that dimension of something being overloaded to control our costs. We can actually control it in a much more intelligent way, driven by the data, the usage, and if we know actually what more, I suppose, atomic operations costs, so on a platform as a service, you can look at exactly what costs are attributed to storage per project, per actually pretty much any granularity you want. So I do think you're right. I think there's a revolution in the making here about the way we buy compute, which is going to break, I suppose, assumptions that we've made for 30 years. I think it's going to change the way enterprise technology selling is done. And these are some of the ripple-on effects that we haven't really come across yet. But I think it's an exciting area. I think you're absolutely right. How we bring in that sort of intelligent quota management and really allocation of costs to the benefits that they relate to. And that's possible now. That's possible.
Mark?
So at Microsoft, in Azure, we're very focused on trying to help organizations get a control of their cloud costs. One of the ways that we do that is by allowing you to tag resources and then correlate that with billing records, so you can see exactly how much different deployments or environments or users are costing you based on their usage of the cloud. But this specific example of developers causing costs to run out of control, that's one that we've seen the potential for internally with Microsoft IT, but is one that customers have come to us and said, please help us control this. In fact, last week at AzureCon, we announced a dev test environment, which is specifically aimed at controlling costs for developers in the cloud, where you can go and configure specific hours that they can use cloud resources, quotas on cloud resources. They get cut off after they exceed certain limits, alerts are raised. So this is an area that we continue to invest in and try to help customers manage their migrations to the cloud.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time, everyone. I'd just like to say thank you very much for my panelists. Giving us a really enlightening session, for me at least, and I hope it was for everybody else. And I hope you've got a bit better sense of the direction of the cloud at the moment and where it's going and how it's going to grow in the coming months and years. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you again to the panelists. Thank you.
We're now just going to have a break for lunch, and we're going to reconvene at 1:40 for the next session from Google. So 1:40 back here. Thanks.